Good evening. Thank you for joining us for a FAFSA information presentation. I am Michelle Page-Bradford, and I am your moderator tonight. And I will be monitoring the chat room. So if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to write your question in there, and then we'll have time after the presentation to answer any questions. And also, there's more information that will come at the end, so be looking for that as well. I think we'll go ahead and get started with our presenters, Vanessa and Sicily. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Michelle. I'm Vanessa Flipse. I work at Kansas State University, and I will also let Sicily introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Sicily Shannon, and I work in the Office of Financial Aid at Manhattan Area Technical College.
We're so excited that you've joined us tonight. Thank you so much for being here. If you aren't on mute, if you could make sure that I'm going to try to mute you, but um, please make sure you mute yourself. I don't know. There we go. Okay, perfect. So tonight we're going to talk about completing the FAFSA and just give you some general information about what that process looks like. So see if I can advance the screens. All right. So um, there's just going to be several things that we're going to talk about tonight. Number one, we're just going to give sort of a general overview of some of the information we're going to tell you. We're going to let you know about the setting up your studentaid.gov account, which we used to call your FSA ID, and what that looks like for you now since they've done FAFSA simplification. We're also going to talk about how to fill out the 26-27 FAFSA, things that you should expect after your FAFSA is submitted, what that process looks like for you, and then future virtual help sessions for the FAFSA. Okay. So FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. You can obviously get there by going to studentaid.gov. And when you are there, you're going to want to pick the 26-27 FAFSA. When you do that, it is going to use some information from your prior tax year. So that is something that you will want to know. You need to file every year to be eligible for student aid at your institution. There are some priority dates, and it's usually available beginning October 1, although if you had done it a couple of years ago, you would know that they were going through the tooling process of the FAFSA, and so that's not always true, but generally it begins October 1.
So the FAFSA application is a role-based form. Generally, there's two roles. There's the student and the parent. And so if the student is logging in to complete the FAFSA, they would want to select student. If the student has sent the invite to the parent and the parent is then completing their portion, they would select their role as the parent.
And on this page, we're not going to go into a lot of in-depth information, but what you need to know about this is that the FAFSA now allows you to bring over your tax information through the IRS Direct Data Exchange. So it's just going to populate a lot of that information for you. So you're no longer required to have all of your tax documents unless there could be some situations where you might need them, but it has become a lot smoother for everyone. And so hopefully you're able to utilize that that piece if you have filed your taxes in the 2024 year.
Here's some additional information regarding the direct data exchange, or the FADDX, in terms of when it cannot be used. So as we know, the 2627 FAFSA does utilize the 2024 federal tax information. So it's not going to be able to be used if you did not file a tax return, if your return for any reason was amended, if for any reason you have like foreign income or a foreign tax return. There's also going to be situations where if your marital status has changed, or your tax return was just filed a week ago and the IRS has not had time to process it. There's going to be times where you may have a contributor who just refuses consent, in which case the DDX is unable to be used. So if this is the case, it is going to populate manual fields. You would need to have your tax return in front of you and be prepared to essentially manually enter your financial information. And then further, it is possible that you may need to also verify additional information, such as sending that tax document and whatnot to the school itself.
Okay, so setting up your studentaid.gov accounts. When you are creating your accounts, each person who is considered a contributor will have to set something up at studentaid.gov. Each person has to do it themselves. So it used to be sometimes mom would do it for everybody, and that isn't the case anymore. Now the student will have to set up their own account, and the parent will then be invited to set up their account. You need to type your name exactly as it appears on your Social Security card. That's very important because it can create issues later if you don't. The system may not recognize who you are. Your email address and your is required. A phone number is optional. You want to make sure as the student that you're utilizing an email address that you'll have access to after you graduate. I have seen in instances where the student utilized their account from their high school, and then after they graduate, they no longer had access to that, and that can create issues down the road. So make sure that you're using a Gmail account or some other private account that you have. Or if you don't have one, set one up before you go in to set up your ID. You need to remember your username and password and challenge questions. Write them down somewhere if you don't think that you can remember it, because it's more difficult to get it later. So better that you write it down and remember it, because you're going to need it each year as you fill out the FAFSA. It is going to require verifiable email address, and it's going to go through your Social Security number is going to go through the Social Security Administration. So that is going to be verified. Make sure you're very careful when you're typing those in. Have your Social Security card in front of you. I know a lot of times as students, you're not necessarily, you haven't utilized it before. And so make sure you've asked your parents for that card so you can make sure that your Social Security number is correct. Okay. You're going to enter your name, your date of birth, and your Social Security number, okay? And you're going to create a username and confirm your email. So there's going to be, you're going to type in the email, you're going to confirm the email, you need to set up a password and write those things down. Okay? The next thing is you're going to enter your mailing address. It is required for those who don't have a Social Security number, and enter your mobile number. If you don't have a US mobile number, you can leave this blank. that is optional. So. And then you're going to select your language preference. This is kind of a nice thing for those families that English is not their first language. So make sure that you do that. And then you're going to hit confirm. And you're going to create, answer your challenge questions. This is another way for you to go in if you forgot your password to go in and get access to your account. So make sure you do this step. Okay. You're going to set up you're going to use two-factor verification. So if everyone's not familiar with that, a lot of times that's just a code that they send you to your email or to your text. So on your cell phone. So make sure that you do that. You must confirm that both of these are correct before you can move on. So, and then there's also the option that you could use an authenticator app, but a lot of people don't have those on their phones. So I wouldn't worry about necessarily doing that if you don't have one. Okay. If you don't have a social security number, you still are able to create an account. You just need to make sure that you mark the box that says, I don't have a social security number. And this is only meant for families who have parents that are going to be contributors that do not have a social security number. Okay. They're not eligible. And they're not an eligible non-citizen. So if that's the case, you would want to use that. This is not typically something that the student would do. So it's only for the contributors, the parent contributors. You're going to check that box, and then you're going to answer a series of knowledge-based identity questions so that they're able to verify your identity if you do fall into this category. If you pass those knowledge-based process or questions, then the account is created. If you don't pass this piece, there's actually a verification step that can be utilized, but you have to go back in, and I believe there's some paperwork, Sicily, you can like help steer me if I'm wrong here still, because I haven't done this for a while. There is a document that you can send in with a copy of your ID and possibly a bill. Is that still the case?
It is, yes.
Yeah. So if you
And I
don't
will
pass
say,
this, that would be the next step.
yeah, and I will say when you go to studentaid.gov, they have a really great chat option. And those folks who are behind the chat, in my opinion and my experience, have always been really beneficial at being able to help. And so if you ever just get stuck, because it can be a long wait when trying to call student aid or federal student aid, the chat feature does work wonders.
Yeah. And I've never had any problems when I've tried to call in. Now, it used to be kind of a wait. I don't know if they've sort of fixed that problem, but whenever I've gotten into anyone, they're always very pleasant. So, okay. So this is the other piece, and it is called the attestation and validation of identity. And if you have to utilize this, your documents can't be expired, and you can use any of these things to help verify your identity. So you would need something from Group A and something from Group B. Typically, it's your driver's license and then like a community ID card, or I've seen other things, but these are things that you could, and then that you could utilize, and then that would be emailed to ID verification at ed.gov. Typically, it takes 1 to 3 days for them to go through the process of looking through it and verifying it, and then you should get some kind of an email after that has been completed, letting you know that it is completed and that your ID is set up. Okay. No one else. So these are some frequently asked questions. Can someone else create my account for me? No. It used to be parents could do it for their student and students could do it for their parent, and they've tried to like crack down on that. So they want you, they're very serious about wanting you to do it yourself. And so the student needs to do it on their own and the parent needs to do it on their own. Nobody should be setting up each other's account. It shouldn't be even something that you can do. Can I share my account info with others? No, that is a very bad idea. This is confidential information. It is how you are going to later on go in and accept things like loans. So you don't want to be giving out that information and have someone else have access to that for you on behalf of you. If you're having trouble setting up your studentaid.gov account, there could be several reasons why a contributor might be having issues. And if they are, they should contact federal student aid for assistance. Sometimes your financial aid office can help with it, but a lot of times it's something you're going to have to reach out to federal student aid and get them to walk you through it. And do I need to create a new account if I already have an account? No, you should only have one account. And so if you've created an account and you've forgotten, then you need to go through the process of trying to remember your or retrieve your username or retrieve your password or set up a new password. And those are like on the website, you can find that area where it's like retrieve. Okay.
So now we're going to go into the 2026-27 FAFSA form itself, just kind of walk you through that process. So when you go in, it's going to ask for your student information. So once you click on the FAFSA, it should have automatically populated the information that you entered previously when you created your account or when you currently created your account. I always recommend just double checking everything, make sure what's listed is accurate. If anything is incorrect, it can cause processing issues and delays. And so we would definitely want to make sure that we get it updated. And then when it comes to updating information listed, unfortunately, you do actually have to access the settings in your account. So oftentimes when you log into your studentaid.gov account, in the top right-hand corner, you'll see your name with a little drop down. You can click on that and access your settings from there. You will have to provide consent and approval. So this is going to go back to that FADDX or that direct data exchange that we talked about. It's essentially going to inform you about the consent and approval process where the FAFSA can utilize your federal tax information and automatically import that over for you. Once you provide this, it will transfer you directly over into the IRS and put everything together. And then you'll be able to see some of that information populated into your finance section. If you look at the screenshot, it does tell you within that if you don't provide your consent and approval, essentially it won't let you move forward. And so you will want to be prepared to accept the information. But again, always make sure that you're reading what you're accepting. So consent and approval continued. As you can see, this is just a continuation of the previous page. It does allow you to kind of expand and collapse the FAQ. So if you have questions about who should provide consent, marital status, what happens after providing consent and approval, you can certainly read through those. Once you select approve, though, again, it is going to allow you to then connect to the IRS so it can import that information and then take you to the next page. So on the FAFSA, there is always at least one contributor. There could be more contributors, and so it's important to understand what a contributor is. And basically, it's going to be any person whose financial information is going to be required on the FAFSA. It is determined by whether a student is dependent or independent, and that's going to be based on the student status and the family situation. Unfortunately, it is not based on who is willing or not willing to help. At the bottom, you'll see that there is a breakdown. So the student is always going to be a contributor. If the student is married at the time that the FAFSA is being completed, the spouse would be a contributor. If the student is not married, but under the age of 24, not married or have dependents, then it could be a likelihood that the parent is going to be a contributor. If the student is dependent, when it comes to the parents, this does include biological or adopted parents. If both parents are married, then both parents would be contributors. If the student's parents are unmarried but living together, both parents would still be contributors. If the parents are divorced and separated, the parent who provides the most financial support is going to be the contributor. In some cases, however, parents are remarried, in which case the parent and the step parents would be the contributor. And so it's always important to know who is essentially going to need to provide their information. And going back to some of the things that Vanessa talked about, each contributor is going to require their own account. So it will be important for each of those persons to make sure that they have their own studentaid.gov ID and password. Some additional information on who is a contributor. So again, you, the student, are always going to be a contributor. Your biological or adopted parents, your spouse and or your partner's spouse. A contributor is not going to be a foster parent. It's not going to be a fiance or someone that you're engaged to, a boyfriend or a girlfriend. The other biological parent when they are not married or don't live with your parent. And then grandparents who have not adopted you would also not be a contributor on the FAFSA. When identifying contributors, there's going to be some factors that can certainly help you with that process. One of them is going to be dependency status. So whether you are considered a dependent status student on the FAFSA and it would require your parents, or if you would be independent because of your age or you're married, something along that line. So your marital status could definitely determine that. And then identifying contributor information could also include your tax filing status. So do you file single? Do you file married? Do you file head of household? Some of those could come into play for you as well. So all students are considered dependent unless they were born before January 1st, 2003. If you are a veteran or currently serving on active duty military, I do want to mention that active duty military doesn't necessarily include reserves or those who are participating in the National Guard. Active duty military does have a different definition according to federal student aid regulations. And essentially that is a person that is part of like the Army, the Air Force, any of those other branches. They have gone through like their basic training process as well as their AIT, and they've served at least 1 day active duty. So essentially you've made it to your duty station and you've been at that duty station for at least 1 day. Dependent students are not going to be dependent if they're married, but again, if you're not married or have children that you support or another dependent, you would be dependent. And I say other dependent because we do have situations and we've seen situations where even though you are the dependent, you are supporting a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle. If that is the case, then you could be independent for FAFSA purposes. If both parents are deceased, this could be in that category. There's also going to be some additional questions on the FAFSA to help determine your dependency status, such as were you in foster care after the age of 13? After the age of 13, have you ever been a dependent or a ward of the court? Were you an emancipated minor? Were you in the legal guardianship of another person? Is there another unusual circumstance, or have you ever been at risk of being homeless? If you cannot answer yes, potentially to any of those questions, then you would report parent info on the FAFSA, even if you are self-supporting. So when it comes to reporting parent information on the FAFSA, as you can see, they do define parent as being a biological or adopted parent. One of the questions that it's going to ask you is if your parents are married to each other. So in this case, you would indicate yes and no. If you indicate yes, it's going to let you know that you need to provide information for both parents. It's going to ask you as well if your parents live together, and some additional questions to determine if you need to report both parents or if you need to report like a parent and a step parent. So continuing on, reporting parent information. If your parents are not married and do not live together, you would not need to report both parents on the FAFSA. You would want to provide the information for the parent who does provide more financial support. And of course, if your parents have never been remarried, have never been married, or are not remarried, then it could just be where you're providing information for one parent on the FAFSA. So again, it's going to ask you some very specific questions that you just want to read carefully and answer to the best of your ability to determine your overall status and who's going to be required to provide their information and consent. So again, here's some additional information with parents. So if parents are not married and they do not live together, next slide, I'm sorry, Vanessa. So if parents are not married and they do not live together, you essentially would look at, again, who provides more. If parents provided equal financial support, it's going to ask you some questions about that. You are going to report the parent with the higher or the greater income and assets. And then, of course, if that parent has remarried, you would also have to indicate the step parent and the step parent information on the FAFSA. When it comes to inviting your parent, the student will start the process. And then, of course, you'll go through all of those questions regarding your parent to determine who you need to invite. But on the 26-27 age year, it is going to ask you for your parent's email address. And then what you'll do is you'll send that invite to your parent. Your parent will then receive a code via email. So when they log in with their FSA user ID and password, they can then enter that code to be able to access your FAFSA, enter their information as a contributor. Contributors, again, what that is someone who has to set up an account and provide consent. So again, the student is always going to be a contributor. Their role is going to be the person who essentially is completing the application. The parent, again, if you are a dependent status student based on the questions of the FAFSA, they as well are going to be a contributor. In their case, their role simply would be just a parent contributor because, again, you don't want to be sharing your information. You don't want a parent filling out information on your behalf or you on your parent's behalf. And then the parent spouse, this could be a maybe because some parents are remarried, some parents are not. Same situation with the role, they would be just a parent contributor. The parents, again, are going to receive an email. If you look at the screen, this is roughly what it's going to look like. So as you can see, it's going to have that code. This is a little bit different from the 2025-2026 FAFSA in that that code was not required. So that is a change this year from last year in that now they send that code. Your parent will utilize that code to log in and accept the invitation. If it was sent by mistake, as you can see under the code, it does let you know that if there was a mistake, the parent can decline that invitation. If that is declined, you would definitely want to reach out to your school so your school can help you make some necessary adjustments to get the invite resent or get it sent correctly so your parent then can come in successfully and complete their information on behalf of your FAFSA. When logging in, the parent is going to, again, utilize the email that they've received to log in. The parent should already have their own login credentials. So again, their own studentaid.gov ID and password. If the parent does not already have one, it'll be important for them to go in and create one so they can then go in via that email that they receive with that code and access everything successfully on their own account. So the parent's going to accept the invitation. So when they receive that email and they click on that, it's going to ask for that invitation code. And so they'll type that and essentially just hit submit. In some cases, the box should automatically populate. In most cases, it should, but if the box doesn't populate, the parent would need to manually enter that. Once the parent accepts the invitation, they're going to click submit, and then they're going to get a little pop-up, essentially just notifying them that by accepting the invitation, that they are agreeing to share their information. It'll list their student's name, so they just want to make sure that it does state their student. We do have some parents who may have twins or have multiple children attending schools at the same time, so it's very important to make sure that your parent is accepting on behalf of the correct child. And then there are some instances where parents are unable to provide information on the FAFSA. We are going to discuss that. But just some things to remember, students are not required to report information if they were born before January 1st of 2003. Essentially, the age is going to be 24. Students are not required to report parental information if they are married, or again, if they are an active duty status or a veteran status. If they have children that they support, or again, if they support a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle. So again, you're going to answer those questions about being in foster care, being a ward of the court. And so you're going to have those situations. If you do answer yes to one of those questions, you would be considered provisionally independent. The school will most likely need some additional information to determine the full dependency status. Another area where students would not be required to report their parental information, again, is if they were emancipated, if they were in a legal guardianship, are homeless or at risk of being homeless. So for homeless students, for those who indicate that they are homeless on the FAFSA, same situation as before. If you were to select a ward of the court or in the foster care system, you are considered provisionally independent. And so essentially what that means is it does initially assume that you are independent, but the school is then going to reach out to you for some additional information. They have 60 days to follow up on the information that's needed. So they can confirm essentially that status. Once that status is confirmed, you would go from a provisionally to an actual independent status. So when it comes to the homeless youth determination, there are some individuals that can make that determination. These include directors or designees of an emergency or like transitional shelter. There's street outreach programs, there's different drop-in centers and other programs in areas that serve those experience homelessness specifically. Oftentimes you can go to like your high school liaison or your high school counselor. There's also the McKinney-Vento representative. Some of these also include people as part of like the TRIO and the Gear Up programs. And then of course you can always reach out to your financial aid administrators at your school and discuss your status with them to help get that determination. If you, the student, have received a documented determination from one of those authorities mentioned above, the institution may not request additional documentation, proof, or statements unless information is conflicting about the student's data. So it will be up to the school to kind of go through what you've provided, make sure that everything aligns so they can take you out of that provisional status. If the documentation is sufficient, it generally will include things such as a documented phone call, written statements, and verifiable electronic data matches. If the student is unable to provide the documentation from at least one of the above entities, FAAs, or financial aid administrators, will review what has been provided, review the circumstances, and then help make the determination on their own as to whether you could fall under that homeless status. Based upon written statements from or documented interviews with the students that confirm they're homeless or at risk of being homeless or self-supporting, and then made without regard to the reasons that the student is unaccompanied and or homeless. Now, as we know, we do come across unusual circumstances. These are some examples of unusual circumstances that could pertain to you on the FAFSA, such as human trafficking, legally granted refugee or asylum status. In some cases, if you've had estrangement or abandonment from your parents, and for students who are incarcerated or have incarcerated parents, rather. Situations that do not qualify for an unusual circumstance would be a parent just refusing to contribute to your educational expense, parents refusing to just provide the information on the FAFSA form, and also a situation that would not qualify is parents that don't claim you as a dependent for income tax purposes. Additionally, if you select yes, you will be allowed to submit your FAFSA if you feel you have an unusual circumstance. It will allow you to submit it without your parent information. It is again going to be assigned a provisional status as independent, but again, the school is going to be required to follow up with the student. We also recommend that the student reach out to the school. A financial aid administrator from your school's office will make a determination regarding your dependency and walk you through any documentation that might be needed or required to help do so. Unusual circumstances, if the student does not have any unusual circumstances, but their parent is unwilling to provide their information, parental information is skipped and the student has opted to receive a direct unsubsidized loan only. So if you have a parent for whatever reason that just does not want to fill out the FAFSA on your behalf, provide their information, or is just unwilling, you can select this option. With that said, as you see on the screen, it would be an unsubsidized loan only. You would not have any consideration for subsidized loans, which are need-based, as well as Pell Grants. And so we always encourage you to have your parent reach out. Maybe we can provide some additional information as to why their information is needed and what we collect, so we can hopefully get them to maybe go ahead and change their mind about helping, because we want to see as many students as possible be Pell eligible as well as subsidized loan eligible. There are going to be some questions that you will have to answer as a student about your demographics. And so these questions will be things such as like gender, race, your ethnicity. It's going to ask you about your citizenship status. One question that it's going to ask you, even if you're an independent student, is about your parents' education status. So it wants to know if your parents graduated from college, if you know that they graduated from college. It's also going to ask you if you had a parent that was killed in the line of duty. And then you are, as a student, going to have to enter some information about your high school and completion status. In some cases, when you get into the demographics of your FAFSA, there is an ability to prefer to not answer. So if that's something that you prefer to not do, you have that ability. You are going to then be asked a series of financial questions. So even though you do use the IRS data return, excuse me, the IRS FADDX, there's going to ask some questions outside of that that should be pretty easy to answer. But the marital status question and the tax filing question, those generally are going to be determined through the IRS. If there is not a match, meaning when you consent to use the FADDX, it can't find your tax return, you would then have to enter the information manually. If there is a match, you're going to be asked to enter some specific questions, such as if you had foreign income, which is rare. It's going to ask you how much you have in your cash, savings, and your checking accounts. And it's going to ask you some additional questions regarding like investment net worth. And then you may have to also answer some questions about IRA and pension rollovers, as well as grants and scholarships. And then it is going to ask you to select your college. When you go in to select your college, some schools may already have given you their federal school code. I do recommend, if you have that school code available, to enter that, because it'll just pull the school directly instead of you having to try to look through the different schools. In some states, like as you can see on the screen with California, if you just search by California, there's going to be a lot of different options that you have to go through. You can add up to 20 colleges on the FAFSA at one time. The only thing that I caution you is keep in mind that if you add 20 schools or add more than one school, your FAFSA is going to go to each of those colleges, and then each of those colleges is going to be reaching out to you or emailing you, trying to process and package your financial aid file. So you definitely have 20, but just know that the more that you add, the more people that are going to just want to try to get everything situated for you as soon as possible. One of the things that you're going to need to do on the FAFSA, which we actually see students forget to do or not do, is sign. It is going to pop up a summary walking through the terms and conditions of the FAFSA. It's letting you know that it is an electronic signature. It's letting you know what it's going to be used for. You're confirming some information such as you're not in default on previous student loans. You don't owe any money back on federal grants. It's also telling you that your school is going to be notified if you are in default, and that you would not receive a federal Pell Grant from more than one school. So again, if you submit to multiple colleges or up to the 20 that you can enter, we utilize a system so schools can see if you're receiving aid at other schools, and so more than one school is not dispersing. It is just a box that you click. So if you look at the second screenshot, it'll just say I and then your name, are agreeing to the terms and conditions. And then you're going to always want to make sure that you click on sign. Sometimes it's easy to remember to check that box, but then not click sign, in which case your FAFSA is still kind of hanging in limbo. It's not actually being submitted. And then upon signing, you're going to get what you see on this next screen. It's essentially letting you know that your submission is pending. As a dependent student, if you do fall under that status for FAFSA purposes, it now has to obviously make sure that your parent has the invite. Your parent then has to accept that invite and be able to log in so they can submit their information on behalf of your FAFSA. So everything essentially can be combined and processed together. So until that has happened, essentially just going to kind of be in a pending process until all contributors have done what they need to do. With the parent contributor email, this essentially is what it's going to look like. We will kind of come back to parent section a little later on, but again, whatever that email is that you input when you go to send that invite, that's where the contributor information and code is going to go for each contributor on the FAFSA. So that's two parents, one parent, parent, and step parent. And then after successfully logging in, your parent is going to be taken to their activity page. So there they can accept the invitation and start the process as being a contributor on your FAFSA form as a dependent student. Your parent, just like you as the student, does also have to provide approval and consent. So like the student uses the FADDX, the parent is going to do the same. So again, it's going to walk you through the summary, the purpose of the FADDX, and then it's going to tell you here that if consent is not provided, the student is not going to be eligible for aid. So it'll be important for your parent to read and understand what they're consenting to so we can transfer the information successfully and so you can receive federal student aid. Here's some more information regarding that direct data exchange. So when a contributor, whether it be the student or the parent, logs in, you're going to provide that consent. A match is going to be made with the IRS automatically. It's an attempt. It'll let you know if for any reason that attempt was not successful. But if the IRS does have a tax record on file for you or your parent, it is going to automatically populate that information on the FAFSA. As you can see on the screen, it is not optional. One of the reasons that they do this as well is to ensure that we are collecting the correct tax year. It's easy to forget that we do utilize the prior tax year when filling out the FAFSA. Now, these fields are hidden because they don't want you to be able to correct them. If there is no IRS match, the contributor will then be asked to manually provide their information. And so we do always recommend when completing the FAFSA to have your tax return in front of you just in case. Sometimes this can occur when the marital status does not match the tax filing status. If there were taxes that were filed like in a foreign country or a non-US territory, or if there is just no return on file. Also, we've noticed that there are some folks, unfortunately, that are victims of tax-related identity theft, and so there could be issues with utilizing the FADDX if you fall in one of those categories. If a match occurs, it does greatly reduce the financial questions that must be answered for both parent and student. And something that we'll talk about later is verification. It does also reduce the likelihood of verification. So some additional information on the parent contributing. The parent is also going to provide their demographic information. It's going to ask them about their current marital status, their state of legal residence. If the parent starts the FAFSA for the student, they will be allowed to answer the student questions regarding address, marital status, college plans, and student personal circumstances. Parent financials. The parent, like the student, is going to be asked a series of financial questions. The marital status and tax filing questions are going to help determine if there's a match with the IRS. The marital status and the tax filing status both must match in order for the parent to have a successful import from the FADDX. If there's not a match, the parent is then going to have to manually enter their tax information on the FAFSA itself. If there is a match, they're only going to be asked specific questions such as federal benefits received. These could be questions such as earned income credit. Is the parent receiving any type of federal housing assistance, SNAP, TANF? Are they on WIC? Were there free lunches involved, Medicaid? It's going to ask questions like the IRA and pension rollovers, grants, scholarships reported on a tax return. This is something that is rare. It is going to ask about foreign income or income earned in Puerto Rico, which again is rare. And then it is also going to ask about the number in college. So, for example, if you have yourself and 3 siblings that are in college, or you have yourself and a twin that's in college, it's going to want to know that information from the parents. There will be an option to update the family size. And so if the information doesn't match the number of tax filers or dependents, or something has changed, maybe mom had a baby since the last time they filed taxes, this is changeable for specific reasons. So investments and assets. On the FAFSA application, parents are going to need to report the following assets and investments. It is going to ask about annual child support received. It is also going to ask them the balance of their cash savings and checking accounts, the parent net worth, and then the parent net worth of business or investment farms. To determine the net worth, it is going to be the value of the investment minus the debt owed against the investment. If it's a negative value, the parent would want to enter 0 on the tax return. And then additional investments are going to include real estate, but we don't want the parent to include the home in which they live. It's going to include information for rental properties. This does include a unit within a family home that has its own entrance, kitchen, and a bath that is rented to someone other than a family member. They would be required to enter information requiring vacation homes, installments, and land sale contracts, as well as the mortgages that are held. Information is going to include trust funds. There's the UGMA, or the Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. And then there's also the UTMA accounts, the Uniform Transfers to Minors. It's going to ask some questions about money market funds, mutual funds, CDs or certificates of deposits, stock options, bonds, securities, tax shelters, and then parents have 529 college savings accounts that are designated specific to their students taking classes or attending college. It's going to ask questions about those 529 savings accounts. When it comes to your parents' investments and assets, there are certain things that are not included. So again, the home in which you live is not going to be included. Cash savings and checking accounts. This is reported in the cash savings and checking account question on the FAFSA. Oftentimes, it's easy to double report this information. So we want to make sure that it's not being double reported. If you have an ABLE account, it's not going to be included. Also not included is going to be things such as the value of life insurance and retirement plans. As you can see in parentheses, this is going to be 401ks, pension funds, annuities, non-educational IRAs, KEO plans, and there could be some others. Again, the UGMA and UTMA accounts are considered assets, and so therefore they must be reported on the FAFSA regardless of the dependency status. Parents would not include those accounts for which they're custodian, but not the owner. And then last is going to be the value of qualified education benefits or education savings accounts that are for the benefit of the parents' other children, not the student specifically. There are going to be some exemptions from asset reporting, and this is going to be for an applicant that would qualify for the maximum Pell amount. AGI and schedules, applicants' parents or student and student spouse for independent students. The 2024 combined AGI is less than 60,000, or they do not file a schedule A, B, D, E, F, or H. That's actually and, not or. And they do not file a schedule C, or their schedule C has a net business income of not more than 10,000 loss or gain. There are some means tested benefits that could be exempt. This is for the applicant or applicant's parents that received a benefit under the means tested federal benefit program during the 2024 or 2025 calendar year. These benefits include things such as the Earned Income Credit, federal housing assistance, free reduced school lunches, Medicaid refundable credits under a qualified health plan, SNAP, WIC, SSI, TANF. And then families who meet this criteria will not have assets included in the SEI calculation. And if you remember from a few screens ago, it is going to very specifically ask you on the FAFSA if any of these means tested benefits apply to you. You would indicate yes, if that is the case, on whatever that may be before you submit your decision. So other FAFSA questions that we come across would be family size. The form is now going to ask you if the family size is different from the number of individuals that were claimed on their taxes. So unborn children are no longer able to be included in that family size, but something that could change that family size is mom didn't have a new baby last year, but now that baby has been born. The number in college. Although the FAFSA is still going to ask for the number in college, the formula that it utilizes to determine aid eligibility will no longer take the number in college into consideration. This could cause some eligibility changes for students who have siblings in college. So this is a change from the 2025-2026. And then on 529 plans, the FAFSA is now only going to have the value of that 529 plan for the student listed on the FAFSA to report. And then much like you would have done as the student, the parent is also going to be required to sign. So same thing, they're going to get that summary, letting them know that they're signing and that information is going to be verified. Again, they're going to check the box at the bottom, and then they want to make sure again that they hit sign. If you don't check the box, but you hit sign, it's not going to process. So again, make sure that parent is checking the box and then signing so everything can be submitted successfully. And then after all sections have been signed and submitted, a confirmation screen is going to be presented. Basically, it's just going to say, congratulations, the FAFSA form is completed. It's going to list the student's name. It's going to give you a completion date. We'll talk about it a little later on, but it is also going to give you some information about what happens next. So it's just going to let you know that an email has been sent to the student, what the student can do to track the status of their form, and that the student is going to also start receiving communications from the school or schools that they listed on the FAFSA application.
Okay, after all of that being said, when the FAFSA is submitted, it's not done. You can't just call the school the next day and say, how much aid is my student going to get, or how much aid am I going to get? Once the FAFSA has been submitted, you will see that eligibility overview. And that is going to outline the estimates of student aid and their student aid index. So this, the the FAFSA form answers, okay, so this outlines the answers that you as the contributor and your parents as the contributor have answered on the FAFSA. If you need to start a correction because any information is incorrect, you'll maybe be able to see it at this point. It will also include some school information. So you'll be able to see and compare the colleges that were selected, and it will give you some general guidelines about what are the next steps that are required if you're needing to make corrections or sending the documents that are needed to the school if they request any. Once that FAFSA has been submitted, there's a 1 to 3 day window before the FAFSA is sent to the school. It goes through a process where it's checked through several government agencies. And so it won't go immediately to the school. So give it a breath or two before you expect to hear anything from the schools. Once the schools have it, they won't necessarily reach out immediately at that point either. Sometimes it will take them a week or so before they process it and bring it into their system. So just make sure that if you haven't heard anything, give it a little bit of time and then you can reach out. When they do have it and they've pulled it into their system, the school will then let you know of any documents that are needed to complete the financial aid file. Let's see, I'm not really sure what they were trying to say here, but they will notify you, the school will notify you of your next steps. So they may reach out to you in several different ways. They might email you, they may send you a letter. Sometimes they will send you both. And sometimes you will have this information in your school portal. So make sure you're looking for all of those types of notifications from the school. Okay, once the school, if they have, well, we'll talk about verification in a minute because there's a couple of things that could stall this process. But if they have everything that they need, the school will then do something, the process called packaging. When they do that, they will send you a notification, and you could see several different types of aid on that notification, including things like grants, which could include the Pell Grant, the SEOG, which is the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or possibly Teach if you're going into the field of education. There's a possibility that you would see that grant or state grants. Grants, remember, are, if you aren't aware, or if you are, just remember that this is money that typically is not going to need to be paid back as long as the student met some kind of eligibility requirement. For instance, being enrolled, staying enrolled, that kind of thing, earning their grades. You could also see scholarships on that letter. So things like institutional scholarships, you could see state scholarships, you could also see private or third-party scholarships if you have applied for those. Make sure that you are reading the website of the schools that you are going to see what their requirements are for applying for certain scholarships. Sometimes you will get it because you applied to the school within a certain amount of time and you have a certain GPA and ACT score. Some of them are going to require other submissions of applications, and then the third parties, obviously, you're going to want to be looking in your local area for those third party or private scholarships to have access to those. And then loans, you could see loans on your financial aid letter, and that could include things like the direct subsidized loan, which is a need-based aid, the direct unsubsidized loan, which is a non-need-based aid, and then I don't know if these are really accurate for 26, 27, the parent loan. There is there is a plus loan for students, but I believe the parent plus loan may be going away in 26, 27. I moved into scholarships and I'm hearing these things sort of third hand now, but am I right about this, Sicily?
I think they are still up in the air. It's my understanding for 26, 27, they still have a plus loan option, but there's some changes that are coming with parent plus loans.
I know here we are working on providing lender lists to fill the gap for that when that actually does go into effect. So just know that that could be coming down the pike, that there won't be the parent loan option. And then work study. So work study is also money that you, okay, and I just want to mention loans are money you have to pay back. So if you're taking out a loan, there's going to come a point in time when you will be responsible for paying back that loan. So if you do take out any of those types of funds, you will be required to do certain other things like you have to do entrance counseling and a master promissory note that will explain the obligations that you have for those. And so just make sure that you're watching also for those notifications so you know what your responsibility is so that you have those in time if you do need them to help you pay for school. Work study, you could possibly have on your financial aid notice the option to receive work study funds. This could come from either the federal government or the state, potentially, if you have any need. So if you see that on there, just know that that money is typically not going to go pay for your schooling. You do have to find a job on campus. You have to go to work and you have to earn that money. But it is potentially there to help you if you don't want to take loans and you are willing to go work and earn the money and then pay the bill later.
I did
Okay.
look it up, Vanessa, really quick. I'm so sorry. So the parent plus loan is still going to exist. They essentially aren't going to let parents now borrow up to the cost of attendance. They have instead put in some annual caps for parents as well as lifetime caps. For some students who are in the program and parents have borrowed, they might fall under some of the older regulations, but for students who are trying to borrow after July 1, 2026, they are definitely going to have some changes.
Okay. Thank you. All right, verification. If you do, again, like I said, we were going to talk about this. If you do happen to hear from your school that your file, your FAFSA file needs some further investigations, you could possibly be selected for a process called verification. If this happens, this is just to look further into the information that you've provided and confirm that the information is correct. If you did happen to use the FAFSA DDX, you are less likely to be selected for verification. And so it is strongly recommended on our part that you do utilize that as you're filling out the FAFSA. If you're not able to, just know that there is the possibility that they may come back and ask you if you were manually required to enter your tax information, they may ask you to provide some of that to the school. It is a random selection process, so there's not any way for the school or someone to tell you that you're going to definitely be selected for verification. However, sometimes schools can choose to select you, and so there's a possibility that you could be selected by either the CPX or you could be selected by the school if they see something that looks like it's not accurate. If that happens, just make sure you get your documents to them as quickly as possible so that your file can be processed and you can be packaged as quickly as possible. Additionally, if you have special circumstances or unusual circumstances that occur in your family, the information you've provided may not actually be accurate anymore. So if there's a loss of job in your household, we know that 2 years prior in tax information is not always the most accurate. They found that for most people it is, but there are circumstances where people lost their job or their wages were reduced. The parents got divorced, or there were medical or dental expenses that went above and beyond what would be considered normal family expenses. In those cases, you do want to reach out to your school and let them know about those situations, because they can do something called a professional judgment, and that will actually potentially help you to get some more of the need-based aid that might be available to you, but maybe isn't based on your 2 years prior tax information. So if any of those things are occurring, then please make sure you're talking to your school financial aid office so that they can help you with that. All right, so some common issues that you may run into. The unsubsidized loan only question being answered incorrectly. That's one that when I was doing it, I saw it a lot, because especially when it was new after FAFSA simplification happened, if you say yes on that question that you only want the unsubsidized loan, it is going to prevent your parent information from being entered. And then later on, we may find out in our office that you actually did need to provide your parent information and that you are eligible for Pell. And so that's going to take some time to resolve. So it's really important that when you're looking through the FAFSA and you're answering those questions, if you have questions about it, there's typically somebody that you can reach out to help you navigate that question. I know a lot of times there's like a little question thing on there that you can see what the frequently asked question is for that. Is that still available? Yeah. Okay. Your first bachelor's degree question being answered incorrectly. Sometimes they'll ask you if you will be receiving your first bachelor's degree. If you say yes, it will prevent you from being Pell eligible. If you're coming right out of high school, most likely that answer is no. For the parent invite, sometimes that has been an issue because you used the wrong email address. And so if the email address was wrong, it wouldn't link up. And then that created gaps in time where the parent never got the invitation. And so I know there were a lot of issues with that several years ago. So your student circumstances, make sure you're reading those very carefully and that you answer those as honestly as possible, because you don't want that to prevent you from getting your aid. I've seen students answer those wrong, and then later on we find out, oh, they don't have a dependent, something to that effect. If you have not been able to get through this process, and that does happen occasionally, you can still utilize the paper FAFSA, but this is a last resort because it takes a very long time after you fill that out and mail it in for it to be processed at the data processing center. So just make sure that you're trying to get through the electronic. It's the fastest, most reliable way to get it done. And so we just would rather that you do it that way, because then you can go ahead and make corrections and things. Currently, if you need to make corrections to your marital status, that is something that you will have to do. It used to be a responsibility of the school, and the student wouldn't be able to do that. But if your marital status has changed after you completed the FAFSA, it's something you will have to go in and make that correction. And then if there is an account that was created by someone other than the intended user, that can be a common issue as well. Okay, if you have questions, there are some additional resources, but the best place to go is to studentaid.gov, and they have a lot of the answers there. They have videos and all sorts of resources for you. So make sure that you are utilizing that.
So next we have our save the dates. So part of our CASFA is what we call a virtual drop-in help event. So we do actually have one tomorrow, and then we'll have one again in February. The times are going to be from 5 to 7:30. Essentially, we can just have you kind of drop in, and we try to help with all things FAFSA. So you'll kind of get brought into a Zoom room, and then what we'll do is branch you out with a specific representative where you can ask questions. If you need help filling out the FAFSA application, they can help you fill that out. Just kind of a drop-in event too for parents, because we understand that appointments and things sometimes during the day can be difficult. And so whatever you think you need or don't need, if you just want to ask some general questions, we would love to help you. So pop in and see us tomorrow, again from 5 to 7:30, or next month, February 19th, again from 5 to 7:30. It's just a great opportunity to get some more one-on-one assistance after hours. Does anybody
Okay,
have any
so
questions?
yep. Just gonna say the same thing.
I don't think she's on here still. It looked like she was having some issues with her audio. But
She did leave, yes.
okay, I was gonna say, so Cheryl did ask a question. She was not sure. She had student loans from a few, excuse me, student loans from a few years ago. And so she already had an account. So if that is the case for any of you on here, you would still utilize that same account to log in and handle your 26-27 FAFSA currently. If you have forgotten the information, because we all forget things, it does give you the ability to look up your ID and your password. So when you go to studentaid.gov and you go to click on login in that top right hand corner, it's then going to give you a little area where you can click because you forgot, one or the other. I have had some situations where students just don't have access to any of the information because it's, a much older account, in which case I've always helped them just kind of go to the chat, and they'll go through an account recovery process for you, get everything updated so you can successfully log in. But the system does track it. Once you enter that social, it is in their system, so it won't let you try to go in and recreate a second account. So if that's a question for you, or if you know Cheryl, just re-verify that you can use that same account that you had a couple years ago when you utilized FAFSA.
And hopefully she can get back in and watch the recording of this, because we have been recording, and so this will be available on our website later to view. Hopefully she'll know that.
And see, another question that was asked by Cheryl as well. It looks like Michelle did reply to her, but she did ask if there's anything recommended. So again, when you go into fill out the FAFSA application, it is going to have you consent to utilizing the FADDX. The hope is that it can import the tax information for you. But again, the 26-27 FAFSA application does utilize the prior year. So it'll go off of the 2024 taxes. So to be safe, I always recommend having your tax return handy, or having it in front of you. So if you have to enter anything manually, or it's asking you some questions about, IRAs and rollovers and investments that you just don't know the answers to, but are on the tax return, you have it right there to be able to just kind of pop that information in and help you run through the application a little bit smoothly.
Okay. Do we have any other questions before we end the session? I think we have one participant still, so you have a captive audience. If you want to unmute your microphone, you're welcome to ask us any questions that you might have.
At this time, we're just getting this process started, so no questions yet.
Okay, great. Well,
Yeah.
feel free to drop into any of our help events as well if you need
Okay.
additional help.
All
Thanks for
right. Well,
joining
thank
us.
Sure. Thanks for your time.
All right.
Have a wonderful evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.